Today we're going to talk about applying guiding principles for successful program delivery. And this is a book that I wrote maybe 15 years ago. And I think it's still relevant today, a lot of the concepts and principles. And so I wanted to sort of recreate it here. And let me know what you think of this approach and how you think it's sustained its power for so long. So we're going to talk about the background and the case for what that means. What is the consultative approach? I'll get into the 8 guiding principles and then talk about how this applies to the different functions within program and project management. So if you think about the landscape today, it's been changing, and it's been changing like this for a really long time. There's global competition. Shareholders are way more demanding than they used to be, expecting returns of the companies. The technology's been evolving and even accelerated tremendously with AI. The economy has been volatile for a long time, and companies are placing larger bets on investments. It's not uncommon now for companies to spend, 9 figures on multiple programs when before, a $5 million program was considered big. And what that means for our programs is programs are becoming bigger. The technology is way more complex than it used to be. The business solutions are becoming more complex. There's more dependencies within the program and even outside the program. Resources are utilized from many different places. There's way more stakeholders to manage, and with regulations and compliance, there's a lot more controls that need to be considered. And if you think about traditional programs, before there was one big program, the projects rolled up to it, the people rolled up to it, and the program manager had all the power. And today that's just not the case. As you can see on the picture, there's projects that are outside the program, there's resources that are outside the program, there's matrixed environments. And I think this picture even oversimplifies the challenge, where now there's Gantt overlapping Venn diagrams where multiple programs have similar scope and they're interdependent on each other, and it's just way more complex. And on top of that, success remains low. So I've been following the Standish Group for years, and they generate this project set. And I don't think I've seen any report in the last, 15, 20 years where project success has been more than a third. So companies are investing a tremendous amount of money, and a third of the programs are actually successful in meeting their goals. And that directly ties to our jobs, which is trying to deliver against those goals. So what is the consultative approach? It means taking consultative skills and techniques to influence others. And I know I say consultative twice. I'll talk about what that really means. But why is it needed? The complexity in the dynamics of the business environment, as mentioned before, there's need for way more transparency of progress and information, lots of stakeholders that require that information and want to be involved in the program. And all of that requires way more transparency and diligence, staying on top of all those moving parts. And so, 70 years ago, French and Raven came up with this types of power, and I think it's still relevant today. And if you think about that for us in program management, there's legitimate power, which we don't have. That means the resources report to us, and they don't. We're not the managers. There's expert power, and given the complexities, we can't be experts in the technologies or the solutions, and so we don't have that. There's reward power, which is maybe the resources report to us and we can sort of give them bonuses. And while we can influence that with performance feedback, we don't really have the ability to reward, nor do we have the ability to be coercive, which is punishing people. And we can escalate and so on, but again, it's not sort of direct coercion. So really the only kind of power that we have is referential, which is influencing and motivating and negotiating, and that's what it means to be consultative. And so I think that's the primary focus that we have and the primary tool. So let's talk about what that means in sort of traditional programs versus consultative. Traditionally, the resources reported to the PM and they just told them what to do, and now it's a matrixed environment, there's indirect resources, there's other stakeholders. Before we just had one big plan and we managed the plan. And now we have to manage expectations, we have to understand what levers can be pulled. There's a lot of different components that we need to manage, whereas before it was just I manage the plan, I tell you what to do. And that gets to sort of the next line. And now there's resources and there's interdependencies and so on. So the plans have become more complicated. The schedule, you'd find out misses and you'd have time to do things. With the speed now, the best you can do is proactively look at trends and sort of course correct before they happen. but decisions are based on perception as opposed to now it's got to be informed in facts and metrics. Before there was a good amount of data, and now you have to actually look at the insights. What are they telling you? What are the trends? Reporting used to just be status. You'd have monster status reports, and now there's KPIs and OKRs and risks and health and balanced scorecards and all sorts of stuff. Vendors, you told them what to do, they were vendors, and now you have to act way more like partners because they have a vested interest in the program. So you can see the program style has evolved significantly. And here's sort of an example of what that matrix model looks like, where you might have these vertical projects that have discrete scope, and then you have these horizontal teams where I also have leads, and then at the intersection are the people that do the work. So way more of a matrixed model, in today's programs. So there's a couple of different types of models that you can take in the consultative approach. And you could sort of be the weatherman where you just report on some information, where you don't really have influence, you don't really control the process, you just report on it. Or there's sort of guiding where you're the air traffic controller, where you can sort of present your process flows and so on. Maybe you do some of the reporting out, but you don't actually manage the work. And then you get to the squadron leader where you're the PM managing the work, you control the reporting. This is the style I like the most because it's sort of all together. You don't want to be the PMO on the side where you're just pushing out process templates and statuses. When you're managing it, and when I manage these programs, I only put out processes that I use to manage the program. So I'm never just adding process for the sake of it. I'm actually using it to manage my programs. But there is this matrix that you just need to be deliberate with how you plan on doing that. Then it gets to the consultative approach. And I sort of think about it in three different buckets. The first is execution diligence, which is ensuring that there's rigor in all the things that you do. Intake, program operations, commitment to delivery. As mentioned, there's so much complexity that being diligent and on top of things is so important for us, which includes management of dependencies, consistency in planning, and so on. The second bucket is around insights. So now that you've been diligent with the work that you're doing, is the transparency required so that you have insights so that you can make decisions? It's the fact base for influencing others, for making presentations to senior management. And then you have single sources of truth for program information. Because of the complexity, there tends to be a lot of information in a lot of places, and sort of corralling that is so important. And then third is the people side of things, the community of practice, so that you're sharing practices, you're sharing templates, and that you're demonstrating leadership to a bunch of different areas. So let's go through each of these guiding principles. Under excellence and diligence, there's really three of them, which is diligence, attention to detail, and simplicity. Then for insights, another three around transparency, having single sources of truth, and being fact-based. And finally, in the community, we have what I call the ships, which I'll talk about, as well as taking a customer approach. Let's dive into each of these. So diligence, the first line is staying on top of your stuff. I'll keep this PG-13, which is really staying on top of all the operational items, action items, deliverables, issues, risks, plans. And they're commitments, they're not suggestions. So when there's dates, you have to view them like they're commitments, which means not making any excuses. It also means looking ahead at upcoming items. If there's a vendor contract that's going to expire, or forecasts and budgets, if there's resources rolling off that are planned to. And so look, there's a matrixed organization, there's a lot of accountabilities, there's a lot of things to stay on top of, but that is literally our job. There's many moving parts to stay on top of, and if it's not us, then who? And I purposely have this as the first thing because I think diligence is the most important thing we can have as project and program managers. And that's why I showed the pyramids, because it took a lot of diligence to make them. Second is attention to detail. In my consulting days at Accenture, we used to always talk about quality at the source. And that means you own your work. Don't assume somebody else is going to find your problems. And that means paying attention to lots of details. If you have communications, are they lined up? Are the bullets right? Is the words wrapped? Spelling, consistency? Numbers need to add up on spreadsheets. These things sound simple, but I promise you, I'm constantly finding errors in other people's work. I'm amazed that I see resumes that are just poorly formatted. Don't document anything you can't explain. We're going to be forced to, as PMs, we have to be the ones presenting it, and you don't want to be in a situation where you can't be able to explain it. understanding the audience and structuring your documents. Look, our work is our reputation, and the quality we present shows how much we care about our reputation and the quality of our work. That's why, to me, a poorly formatted resume is sort of sad, because if somebody's, my opinion is that, when I get a bad resume, I'm thinking if somebody can't put this amount of effort into their career, their resume, then what are they going to do for me on a job? And it's probably, a little bit drastic in saying things like that, but that's how I feel. The third piece on diligence is simplicity. There's many ways to solve the problem, and I realize that as I've gotten smarter and more experienced over my career, I realize that you don't have to make things complex. And so I have this sort of curve here, and I think about early on when I first started programming. And I didn't know anything, so my complexity was low. But then as I learned more, I realized there's more features and there's more things you can do. So I made things really complex as I go up the curve. And then as I got even more experience, I realized I didn't have to make things complex and I should just make them easier, because then it's harder to maintain and so on. And so I bring it down the complexity curve. And so I think that simplicity is a sign of novice. You don't know what you're doing, or genius, because you figured out that you don't have to make things complex. So I call this the complexity curve. So getting into insights, the first one is about transparency. Program and project data is so important on resources, financials, effort, plans, scope, whatever. That information is needed to understand themes and trends and risks. We want to present it in a way to identify what to focus on, or that's where the insights come in, and highlighting risks versus just I can handle it, right? So being transparent on what the risks are in the program. I think yellow is okay. Some cultures and organizations sort of frown on it, and you get sort of in trouble, if you will. But our job is to provide transparency. So I think yellow is okay, and it's really important. And I'll talk about this in a bit, of having all that information in one place. So look, it's our job to present and highlight trends and risks and issues before they're a problem. And if management doesn't want to hear it, I promise you they won't want to hear it when it's actually a problem and they're asking you what happened. Why didn't you tell me? As I mentioned, single sources of truth are so important. There's program information everywhere. So having a single place for key information is important, so that the team knows where to find things, and you know where to find things, and you know what the authoritative source of that information is. Things like intake requests, schedule information, milestones, change controls, decisions, literally every piece of program information. And really, it's about having a master inventory of that information and keeping it updated. That's the living part, is you don't just create a repository and you leave it. Our job is to maintain this information. And the last piece on insights is being fact-based. When we're providing information, when we're making presentations, when we're asking for decisions, it's important that we focus on the facts. And that allows us to facilitate those decisions, to highlight insights, and justify some of our hypotheses and our recommendations. It also takes away the blame, but it requires a level of diligence. We have to actually curate those facts, find the facts, present them in a way that makes sense. And so, here's an 80s reference on the bottom. We'll see, those of you who understand the reference, you can post it in the comments. Now let's talk about communities of practice. These are the three ships that I talk about. And it's ownership, which is taking accountability for work, not just focusing on one task, but everything, because we are ultimately accountable. We are the owners of the plan, and so therefore we need to own everything on it, even if we're not the ones directly doing the work. And that gets to sort of the we model versus the they model. On the program, we own we. There is no they, because we own the whole plan. The second one is stewardship, which is about caring about the work, the project, the company, and doing the right thing, versus just complaining, looking for ways to improve. That's being a good steward of the company. And then there's leadership, which is motivating and influencing others and being a champion. So I really believe that you're either the captain of the ships, or maybe you should walk the plank. And then finally is the customer approach. And actually, I have one of the tips in my other videos on this. But every relationship should be viewed as a customer-facing one. And our job is to maximize the value of our customers. And that means gathering feedback and continuous improvement. And so think about it. If we were a business, if our project was a business, would our customers buy service from us if they had a choice? And if the answer is no, then we need to improve our customer service. So I mentioned all of the 8 guiding principles. I won't drain this so much as point out that if you take every piece of sort of the program management practice or the PMBOK, risks, issues, vendors, every one of these 8 principles can apply to every one of the functions within project and program management. And so the point is that they're very relevant, they're very applicable to everything that we do, and that's why I view them as sort of the core guiding principles. So here's the themes of the day. You want to have constant diligence and attention to detail. Everything starts there. We're the center and the glue of the programs. We're the ones that need to make sure that the information is maintained and that it's accurate. 2 is understanding the implications of the things that we do. 3 talked about authoritative sources of information that's used then to provide transparency for our customers. The tracking of progress is so important because those are early indicators of problems. Want to have a mindset, the ships, right? Ownership, leadership, and stewardship. All these things mean making the time for right things. So you can't be proactive, you can't be diligent, you can't do any of these things unless we're investing those time and viewing them as an investment in time. And lastly, it is the people that makes these principles successful. So focus on the people, focus on the relationships and your stakeholders. So in summary, the project landscape is changing and there's a real need to take the consultative approach. The goals of our program office should be clear of the things that we're trying to do. We have to determine the right model, right? Are we the weatherman or are we the squadron leader, or the weather person? And focusing on those guiding principles to maximize the value. And the last point, as I showed in the chart, is that they're leverageable across all of the domains of program management. So I hope this was valuable for you and that you learned some things. Think about the guiding principles. This is a book that I have published, again, a really long time ago. I want to say 2012, maybe 2013, but it lays out the cases, the 8 principles, I put some templates in there, and so on. So look, thanks for watching. Hopefully this is helpful. Put some comments in and let me know what you think about the principles. Maybe I'm missing some. Maybe you think they're still not relevant, but I'm curious about your thoughts. Thanks for watching.